Well, I'm Chris Glass. I work at the Institute for Research and Teaching and Learning. I'm a doctoral student, just like you. I'm finishing up my doctoral program, and I'm going to be hosting the workshop today. What I think is great about the workshop that I'm going to be sharing is that really it's a synthesis of some workshops that have been happening here at Michigan State that faculty have attended about applying to NSF, NIH grants. So the kinds of things we're going to talk about today, don't feel like it's just dissertation grants, but this is going to be applicable to, I think, writing, good writing, and then grant writing in your future, okay? So we're going to make sure and touch on all these things. And then I also, I try to incorporate active learning kind of principles to this as well, so that what you're really going to be focusing on is not these like principles that I'm going to show up on a PowerPoint slide. And by the way, I gave you this really long PowerPoint that we may not cover everything today, but we're going to cover the really important stuff, and you're going to be able to walk away with all the information. So that's one thing. Another thing you get is you get to hear from people who get to share about grant writing, one from a faculty member's perspective from the HAIL program here, as well as Mike Schreier, who's in the SEPSI program. So we hear a diversity of perspectives of programs and then people as well. So I'm gonna tell you today, this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna overview some practical strategies. So the beginning of this workshop, I'm gonna very quickly move through a lot of content. And most of that is gonna be me highlighting some strategies. It doesn't mean you can't raise your hand and we can't have a discussion, but I'm gonna be shooting through a fire hose with you towards the beginning. We'll be working through the sample proposal together. Then we're going to take a break about 45 minutes in. Chris Wren's going to visit us, as well as Mike Schreier. They're going to share some personal experiences. We'll wrap up any content we haven't covered, and then you're going to practice on your own. So that's how the day is going to go. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn off your inner writer, that creative person that just needs to let his self or herself out, and turn on that a ruthless editor in you. The person that is the critic. Because really good grant writing, really good writing is really, one of the themes of the workshop, is really about ruthless editing. So I want you to take off that writer hat for a second, that hat you put on when we've written your research proposal, and today I want you to put on a different hat and say, I am an editor. I'm an editor of the New York Times. I'm an editor of a major publication. I am like an editor who's going to look at these grant proposals, and I'm going to edit what I'm looking at, the text I'm looking at, as if I didn't write it. I'm going to edit it ruthlessly. Okay? But good grant writing isn't just about editing ruthlessly, it's also about style. People who are reading grants want to enjoy the process. They're often volunteering their time, and the only benefit they get from reading grants is just to enjoy the process. So we're going to talk about style as well. And finally, we're going to talk about creating an irresistible idea. And the way I'm going to define irresistible idea today is to say you need to have a clear idea of what your project is, and then a very clear understanding of what your obvious relative advantage. What if somebody else had the exact same clear idea that you have, and they submitted a grant? What is your obvious relative advantage that you're going to be highlighting in your grant proposal? So we're going to talk about that today. I am going to assume, for the sake of what we're going to do today, that you've already prepared a high-quality research proposal. You're not, the research you're doing is solid research. It's a good idea. It's been vetted. And so we're not going to be focusing on how to write a high-quality research study. I'm not going to spend very much time about literature reviews or methods or implications. I am going to spend a lot of time about writing a high-quality grant proposal. So really, this is about ruthlessly editing a research proposal and making that research proposal be a high-quality grant, a competitive grant proposal. So to do that, we're going to do three things today. I'm going to tell you about key strategies that can make your dissertation grant application more competitive, or frankly, any grant application more competitive. I'm going to allow you to you're going to hear some practical advice from Chris Wren and Mike Schreier, and then I'm going to give you some hands-on practice. But what I want you to do is not think about that practice as something that's going to happen at the very end. I'd like you to go ahead and have your grant proposal out or your research paper out so you can be kind of looking through it and then maybe making some notes. You feel free to, you can talk to the person next to you or make some notes on your research paper during the presentation, because I'm going to say things probably throughout this presentation that you're going to say, okay, wait, I need to think about that with my proposal. So so you kind of make some notes on your proposal kind of along the way, so have it out. So let's start with the good news. You already have a good idea. Okay, you're halfway there. Okay, you already have a good idea. You've thought about this idea for a long time, for the last 4 years. You've received feedback on this idea from your advisors, your colleagues, and your friends. And some of you have actually already defended this idea to some very tough critics, faculty in this program. So the good news is right now you're already almost halfway there. You have a good idea. But here's what you need to know. You have a good idea, but lots of good ideas don't get funded. And here's why they don't get funded. Sometimes they're never submitted. All it takes is a little bit of discipline and a little bit of planning, and you can turn your proposal that you have today into a grant proposal. But not doing that, you're going to miss all the shots you don't take. So sometimes great ideas don't get funded just because they never get submitted. Other things you should know about good ideas is there are lots of good ideas. There's other doctoral students across America right now who also have good ideas. What you need to do is not just present a good idea. You need to figure out what are your obvious relative advantages for your idea and make sure that's very clear to the proposal reviewers. And we're going to talk about that a lot today. And then finally, good ideas are not enough. It's really about this fine art of assembling a persuasive proposal that convinces reviewers to fund your good idea and not other people's good ideas. So Stanley Fish, if you know somebody who's work in political science, he just wrote a book called How to Write a Sentence. And the opening of the book says, some appreciate fine art, others appreciate fine wines, I appreciate fine sentences. So my argument to you today is you're really going to have to begin to think very tactically about what you've written. You're going to have to be thinking at the sentence level of your proposal as well as the structural level. So you have to really develop this fine taste to say, okay, this is pretty good, but it could be a little bit better than it is. And so what I've done as kind of an exercise is you have a sample proposal in front of you. It's this thing right here. Go ahead and turn to the second page. And what I've done, and this is not anyone's work, this is actually something I wrote just for the sake of this workshop. And so you can, thrash it. You can just, say whatever you want about it. You're not going to be hurting my feelings. It's not even my topic. But what I'm hoping to illustrate today is here's a pretty well-written, research idea. There's a lot of potential here, but it's not going to get funding for a grant. And we'll tell you why, because there's so many things wrong with this proposal that if we're all going to be like ruthless editors today, then we're just going to tear this thing to shreds. So the good thing is we're going to practice tearing this proposal to shreds before we kind of turn our eyes on our own proposals. So good ideas don't get funded, well-written grant proposals get funded. So I really like this quote. I always share this quote in all my presentations. There's no amount of grantsmanship that will turn a bad idea into a good one, but there's many ways to disguise a good one. So what you want to do is not disguise your good idea. But this requires attention to detail, and that the differences between a proposal that gets almost funded and a proposal that gets funded is really at the margin. So it's like any competitive activity like athletics or anything else. We really need to be thinking not just the big issues in what you're writing, but the very tiny issues too. So what I'm really going to be focusing on is these tiny things that you can work on to really tune in and tune up your writing so that you can practice the fine art of grantsmanship. This is a shock to some people. Proposal readers don't read every proposal. In fact, really the proposal process is the process of elimination. It's kind of a version of Survivor. There's proposals that never get read. These are either bad ideas or ideas that don't fit the agency mission. So it's possible that you could spend time writing a proposal and it never gets read. There's two other kinds of proposals that might get read, but they might get read with some caution. The first is extensively pursued ideas. So something that might appear to be cliche to the proposal reviewer, something they've heard before. But on the other end, there's also high-risk projects. So if you look at some of the trends of like NIH and NSF, when a new idea is very innovative, it tends to get fewer number of those grants get funded towards the beginning. Once that idea gets more broadly accepted by the scientific community, the probability of getting that idea funded increases. And so in terms of being strategic, a really high-risk project could be a really exciting idea, and we'll talk about that as a strategy, but could also be a reason that your proposal may not get funded. What gets funded? Proposals that are clear, compelling, creative, distinctive, and then current. And we're going to talk about what that is. So reviewers don't read every proposal at the same level of interest or the same speed. They never read some, skim some, read quickly others, read some extensively, read others intensively, and it's just like this bell-shaped curve. You really want to develop a proposal so that your proposal is the kind that a reviewer is going to read intensively. So here's some urban legends, okay? Urban legends about reviewers, okay? First of all, you want your proposal to stand out, but you don't want to believe some common myths about the people who are reading your proposal. The first is that only if you propose something that's heavily theoretical, that has sweeping implications, will your grant get funded. The proposal reviewers want to know that you're going to complete your project, and you're going to complete it within 1 year, and it's a project that a doctoral student with your preparation can do. So that's a myth. Second, grants with lots of interesting ideas get funded. the grants have to have some kind of focus. They have to have a clear, obvious relative advantage. And then finally, grants that are entirely original will get funded. That's that high-risk project thing. You don't need to have a really high-risk project to think that gets funded more than not. There's three basic paradigms that whatever research proposal that you're holding right now, that your proposal is in. Three basic paradigms. First is you're examining a new topic that uses a well-established approach, okay? So most of your research paper is going to be in one of these three paradigms. It's going to fit somewhere in there. So a new topic, a well-established methodology. So there's something new, the topic. There's something that's well-established, the methodology. This is what the form most dissertation proposals take, okay? Second, you're going to examine either a well-established topic, but you're going to have a new approach. So one of the things you're going to want to highlight when you're thinking of your obvious relative advantage is, you know, we've looked at this topic before, but we've never quite looked at it this way. I was consulting with somebody recently about their proposal, and they were doing a very interesting international comparative study. It's actually an area of the world that has been studied quite extensively, and there's a great deal of literature about this area. What makes their proposal exciting? They're using a new methodology to think about that area. And that kind of methodology, by the way, speaks to stakeholders that the existing methodology doesn't. Okay? The existing methodology often speaks more closely to academics. Their methodology they're proposing would speak to different kinds of stakeholders. So what we really tried to work on in that grant proposal is to move front and center to say, this is a well-established topic, and here's what we know because it's been well-researched. However, here's a brand new way to approach it, and here's what that new way brings to you as a granting agency. It's going to speak to these stakeholders, and it's going to fulfill your mission, and to make sure that's really front and center in their proposal. So that's a good way to go. Like I said, a little bit riskier of approach is to examine a new topic with a brand new approach. And by definition, what's challenging about this is you have to convince the reviewer that you're going to be, that your idea, it hasn't been neglected. I mean, it's not a new topic because it's neglected purposefully, because it's not interesting, or it's not a methodology because it's neglected purposely because it's too risky. So that's the third paradigm. So think real quickly about your proposal. And it's not that it has to fit in one of these boxes really clear, but if you just had to reflect, just maybe make a kind of a mental note to yourself. Do you think you're mostly a new topic, mostly a new methodology, with an established topic, kind of mostly, probably both? You're going to be making an argument that both of these need to be. So think about your proposal for just a second here. So what makes you not pass go and do not collect your $200 from the grant company? Well, I came up with a list. The first is, it doesn't fit the agency mission. I'm going to hear me say this again and again and again. And you're going to see when we rewrite this sample proposal how we do that. So really know your agency mission. Spend as much time researching who you're applying to as much as you're researching your topic. It's very, very, very important. Secondly, it needs to be an original idea. If it doesn't follow the structure outlined in the RFP, look at the headings that they use those headings, and don't quibble with them. So whatever structure that their RFP has, the call for proposals, make sure that those are your headings and that you follow the basic structure. Because again, the way their proposal reviewers are going to read your proposal is to probably read intensely the abstract, probably do a little bit of skimming, and then read more intensely if it looks interesting. So follow the structure. And then any kind of misspellings or grammatical errors are kind of a way to, these are all early exits. I mean, this is the kind of the flub that you don't want to make early on in the process, okay? So NSF actually defines what they call a good proposal. And they said a good proposal is a good idea, well expressed with a clear indication of methods for pursuing the idea, evaluating the findings, making them known to all who need to know, and then indicating the broader impacts of the activity. So listen to the different parts of that definition. It's well expressed, so it's clear. There's an indication of the methods. It's very clear how you're going to approach it. That you're going to evaluate the findings, clear analysis, making them known to all who need to know. One of the things often we don't think about, especially because we don't have to do this in our dissertation proposals, is who really cares about your study? I mean, one of the imagination experiments I do with people who come in and talk to me is I say this: pretend everything is wildly successful. Your data is just as you hypothesized. The findings are really a breakthrough discovery for your field in this topic. Who really cares? Who really cares? and brainstorm, make that list as long as possible, and be creative about that list, not just people in your field. Maybe it's an association in DC, maybe it's a national organization, it's definitely the funding agency, but think through the kinds of stakeholders that funding agency is going to go, that's really good. And then finally, the broader impacts of the activity. People want to fund ideas that they're really proud of, that they feel are going to represent the agency well. They're not, in some ways, to kind of depersonalize the process, they're not really funding you, they're kind of funding you to represent the agency, and they're funding an idea that they think is going to advance the mission of the agency. So they're not really even funding you as much as they're funding, they're trying to invite you to become an ambassador for their agency and then contribute to knowledge in their area. So you need to have two things really clear in your mind before you start writing. And the reason I say this is this was at the recent workshop that was given for faculty here that was very well received by the faculty. This was the argument that the person presenting made. If you can get the first 2 pages of your grant proposal right, if you can get that written really well, the rest of it kind of flows naturally. So my focus today is not going to be on writing that whole thing, but I really do believe if you can get that first 2 pages correct, you're going to know how to do the rest of the proposal. And your proposal is going to be very competitive. And remember, that first 2 pages may be the only 2 pages that a reviewer might read of your proposal. So it's really important to get that right. And so we're going to work today just on those first 2 pages because the argument I'm going to make to you today is those are actually the most important pages of your proposal. So getting those right, once you have that in mind, and by the way, it's easy if you have 2 pages to get people's feedback. So it's easy to hand your advisor or a faculty member a copy of a 2-page proposal to say, can you read this and tell me if you think this is a good idea with an obvious relative advantage? And a friend can read it versus could you read this 10 or 12-page paper and give me some feedback. So you're gonna see what we mean by that. So clear idea, an obvious relative advantage, and then together they're an irresistible idea. What do we mean by clear idea? You've probably been thinking about your dissertation idea for a while. But what I really want you to do is kind of loosen that thinking a little bit. Step back from what you've been thinking about, what you've been devoting yourself to say, what are all the different ways I can describe my project? Pretend you're at like a cocktail party. You're going around and people are these are all academics, I guess, or they're asking you about your work. And they seem really interested when you start talking about it, rather than kind of distracted and looking over your shoulder for the other person at the party. So pretend they're asking you, but you're trying to describe it, and you're kind of contextualizing it some different ways. So think about all the different ways you might describe your work, because partly with the agency, thinking how would you describe it to this particular kind of agency versus that particular kind of agency, based on kind of what they're looking for. And I like the quote from Lewis Pauling. He said, the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. So really creative people, the studies on creativity say, creative people have lots of ideas, and then they're really good editors at picking the best ideas of those lots of ideas. So it's not just having a lot of different ways to frame this proposal, but saying, I'm going to step back, brainstorm lots of different ways to think about my work, and then I'm going to objectively go, okay, what's the most interesting way to do this? And one of the things that I find is people say that a lot better than sometimes they write it. Like one of the first things I do when people come and talk to me is I say, well, this was interesting. Let's kind of just talk. Why don't you just tell me, where did this interest come from? What are you hoping to do? And I usually wish I had a tape recorder out because I'm like, okay, let me just play that back. That was awesome. That was very persuasive. And that didn't necessarily always come through in the first paragraph. So real quickly, I want you to turn to the person next to you and I want you to tell them about the great idea that you are thinking about, that you could apply for. So just kind of turn to the person next to you this is short, not too much group work here, but just say something about your idea and why you think it's an interesting idea and what got you interested in it. Okay, let's go ahead and kind of we'll have these conversations throughout. We'll have these kind of moments. I know some people like moments to share, and other people just kind of, like individual work. But you're going to have more time to talk about your idea, but here's what I do want you to observe is, think about the way you express that idea. Is that it had some kind of probably emotional or personal quality to it. It had some kind of persuasive quality why it was an interesting idea. And so make sure and bring that same kind of perspective as you do your writing. So I really encourage people, when they're working in this process, don't necessarily jump into writing too quick. Maybe make it a goal to say, the next 2 weeks, I'm going to talk to 5 different people about my idea. And I'm going to try to get better at sharing my idea. Because the better I'm at sharing that idea, just kind of informally, when it comes to writing this, it's going to be easy. It's going to be cake compared to if I just sat there at the computer screen and stared blankly. So 1 or 2 pithy sentences is a good way to go, and I'll tell you what I think about that in just a second. Now you want to think not just a clear idea, you want to think about your obvious relative advantage. This is different than your clear idea. This is why your idea is being approached differently than other people who might have the same idea as you. So you need to be brutally honest with yourself, which is what will single out your great application from all the other ones under consideration. Is it an understudied population or a really pressing issue? Maybe it's your methodology, potential for a dramatic breakthrough, and to make sure that this is front and center in your proposal. So here's some quotes from some people from NSF that visited the campus a few weeks ago. Miles Bolin, who looks at grants for undergraduate, people studying undergraduate STEM. He just says, honestly, the quality of application is so high that the difference between getting an award and an honorable mention is paper thin. It makes the review process pretty tough. In other words, he's saying, this is fine art. This is fine art. The difference is very, very thin. There's variability in that, but it's a fine art. You really need to think about the margins and the edges. It's paper thin. But here's what I want you to do. It's kind of a paradigm shift. Do not, well, this is my opinion, okay? My opinion. Do not go and buy a book about principles of grant writing, or even like look at the principles I've written down here. In my mind, that's not the most efficient way to learn about good grant writing. One of the best ways to learn is just to read good grants. It's like learning about writing a novel from reading good novels, being familiar with grants. Pick a model that you think is great and follow it. If you want, pick 2. Don't pick 10. Pick a model. Talk to a faculty member who's applied to a grant. Get a model. Look at it. And then rather than kind of starting with these abstract principles, some of them I'm going to talk about today, kind of just read the grant and say, what makes this really interesting? What makes the idea clear, and what makes that obvious relative advantage really clear. And so kind of the first thing, this is like early in the process, pick that model, look for that model. We have them at IRTL, and so will your faculty advisors and probably colleagues in other fields. The other thing I want you to think about too, this is just kind of more of a metaphor, pretend you're giving a TED Talk. And I put this YouTube video on here because there's actually a TED Talk about how to give a TED Talk. And June Cohen gave this kind of TED Talk about how to give a TED Talk. It's about 12 minutes long, and I thought about showing it here, but we really don't have the time. But it's really interesting. But really think about, okay, with TED, the idea is these are ideas that are worth spreading. These are people's life work, okay, not their doctoral work, their life work. And they get to sum it up in about 10 to 12 minutes. They have to figure out a way to do that. They need to communicate to a professional audience, but communicate kind of technical sophistication. So pretend you're having to write a TED Talk. What's going to really excite both the specialist who's very familiar with your field, so they know your expertise, but also inspire the generalist who's just a well-informed professional. So maybe look, and if you want, look at the video. It's kind of a fun thing to look at. And remember, you're not submitting your grant proposal. This is another kind of paradigm shift. You're not submitting your proposal to an agency. You're actually submitting your proposal to 2 or 3 reviewers. So it's not this monolithic agency. You're not applying to Spencer. You're actually applying to people who've gotten Spencers, or people who are volunteering for Spencer. So remember, Spencer is kind of this kind of umbrella that is, these people are the ones who you're applying to. So think in terms of the reviewer, not necessarily even the agency. The reviewer is acting on behalf of the agency. It's kind of a mind shift. And then also know your fit. If realize that agency is mandated to fund certain things. If you apply to AAUW, it has to be about issues of women and gender. It absolutely has to be. If it's not very clear and early on, they're just going to discard it, put it to the side. Because it's just, not that it's not a great idea, it's just not what they fund. Consider how it's going to help achieve the agency, help that agency achieve its mission. And then also, just like you would study a model, look at what that agency has funded in the past. Study it. One of the things that is really exciting for people, like I was consulting with somebody recently, they were interested in studying a particular understudied population, minority population, relative to ADHD. And we were looking at some different possibilities. And we looked at the Jack Kent Cook Foundation that funds what are considered to be low income, high achieving individuals. We found out that they had just funded a grant with that same population related to ADHD a year before. It was really surprising for them to this person to realize, wait, they funded like my stuff in the past. That means they're likely to fund something similar to it in the future. You also kind of get a good sense of how the titles get framed. Yeah.
Do you try to cite that in your proposal somehow? Does that?
I want to talk about the lit review. I think a few savvy strategies to say. I think citing other people's work is good. I talked to somebody else who found out that 3 years earlier, her kind of mentor hero scholar that she's never met in a different university was a recipient of a grant. And she actually knew this person through meeting them at conferences. And so it was, you could cite their work. You could cite past proposals if they have reports. You can also cite your own work and just put, applicant. That can be also, especially if it's been published in a peer-reviewed journal article. And again, this is more just this is more playing Vegas with your proposal. But you can try to pretend to cite the reviewer's work as well. Like if you think you might know who the reviewers are, you can try to put some of their work in there. But it's kind of a, you don't really know. So remember, you have to think about your writing from the reviewer's perspective. And here's what I'd say. They're accomplished people, they're dedicated people, knowledgeable, conscientious people. They probably have been past recipients of the grant that you're applying for. They're reviewing large stacks of proposals. They have to do it thoroughly, but they also want to do it quickly, and they're busy, busy, busy. So they have this. If you look at our good old friend Miles again, he's going to tell you that a typical reviewer, he said this 2 weeks ago, has 50 proposals to read. It's a long, arduous process. 2 reviewers isn't very much, but this is a huge logistical problem. Agencies don't know what to do with all the proposals, so they just throw 50 proposals at a reviewer possibly, and your proposal has to stand out. It has to stand out pretty quick. So that kind of lets you see it from the reviewer's perspective. More urban legends about reviewers. They share your enthusiasm and interest in the research idea. Maybe so, maybe not. You don't necessarily know. They're all experts in your topic area. All, probably not. Some, probably so. But definitely not all experts in your topic area. They're familiar with the research methodology. Again, all, probably not. Some, probably so. They review each proposal in detail. No, they're always picking and choosing. What am I going to read intensely? What I'm going to skim. So here's 7 questions. And so this is a really kind of good summary slide when you want to think about what a proposal reviewer might be looking at your grant to say, is this something I'm going to fund? And I think this in some ways synthesizes everything I'm going to share today. One is experience. They want to know you're well positioned to do this project. So they're going to look at your CV, they're going to look at your personal statement, they're going to look at your history, they're going to look at what you're proposing and say, does this person have the background to do the project that they're proposing? Do they have that experience? Second is they want to see that it's a feasible project. This is, just like, many advisors here want your dissertation to be done. The best dissertation is a done dissertation. From the granting agency's point of view, the best grant is done in 1 year. So it's not even just done, but it's done in 1 year. They want to make sure you're proposing a project that's interesting, but not something that's going to take you like more than 12 months to finish. They fund you. They want to know that it's well planned. We'll talk about some strategies to do that. A distinctive approach. Could just anybody do this project? Are you uniquely positioned? What I mean by that is there something about your life story, something about how this project or this interest emerged for you, something about your kind of your experience that makes you have kind of a distinctive perspective when it comes to looking at this problem or this issue in a particular kind of way? What's your kind of distinctive approach? And then mission. Is this going to promote the mission of the agency? Again, you'll hear that again and again. Urgency and relevance. Of all the things that we could fund, we only get to fund 20 things. Is this the most urgent and relevant topic of all the proposals that we're reading? So a sense of that. And then also, do you embody, are you a good representative of the agency? Do you embody the agency's goals? 7 things. And again, I did this, so like if you don't believe me, this NSF proposal, you can see, and I don't know if this is even on your thing, but they're saying all the same things. Individual experiences, future plans, prior accomplishments, leadership potential. Are you going to enhance scientific and technical understanding? Are you encouraging diversity? Are you integrating research and education? They're looking for the whole package. They want to see how the whole thing fits together. So Miles, again, our buddy, says proposals that are really effective are really integrated. The more you can integrate, the better you are. So you really want to tell one consistent story. It's not just what you're writing. It's not just your proposal narrative. You want to think about how your personal or professional statement, we'll talk about that today, fits with the research statement you're proposing, fits with your CV, fits with the letters of recommendation you're being asked to write, fits with the agency mission. You're really trying to think how this is integrated, how they really fit together, one compelling story. So you want to look at multiple materials, telling one story. And then, and so somebody asked Miles about, transcripts, and here's what he said. Frankly, I don't think transcripts are very important. We make sure that they've taken the right courses. Often that's easily met. If they have a 3.4, a 3.8, or a 3.9, it doesn't really matter. The other evidence is more persuasive. The qualifications of applications is so far beyond basic that the research plan, personal statement, and letters of reference matter more. In other words, he's kind of saying, I want to read in your personal statement something that really makes you a distinctive person to do this project. It's going to really have a lot of weight as opposed to maybe meeting the basic criteria of the agency or a transcript. So, here's what a reviewer eventually fills out. And here's just a sample. And it's, I kind of do this as a reality check. And this is just for AIR. But, the reviewers fill out a form, looks just like this. And they say, the selected data, are appropriate for the proposed research. Yes, unclear, or no. You want to get like all yeses down there. And then at the very bottom, you want them to check fund. And then you want them to say, great comments about you. But it's what it comes down to. I wish it was a more, it's not, and I think that's what Miles, it's not really a scientific process. There's variability. It's a human process. But you can help increase your chances by doing some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So let's look at the sample proposal. And then I think we'll take a break in about 5 minutes to hear from Chris and Mike. So let's look at this one. I'm going to pretend that we're going to submit this proposal to the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation. The Jack Kent Cooke Foundation, you can see the first thing I want to know is the agency mission. They support advanced doctoral students for completing dissertations that further the understanding of educational pathways and experiences of the high-achieving, low-income students. Okay? So this looks like a pretty good fit. Let's look at the, so we're going to do kind of a page 1 exercise. Like I said, if you've effectively written page 1, you'll be ready for the rest. But kind of read the first, the sentence, or the title is Navigating the Transition, Evaluating Programs Designed to Enhance Reading Proficiency of Elementary-Age Children of Undocumented Immigrants. Seems kind of like an urgent issue. Seems kind of interesting. Lots of potential. Pretty good idea here. First sentence. About 5.5 million children in this country have at least one parent who's an undocumented immigrant. By the way, these are true statements based on just some data out there. Research suggests that the majority of these students now make the transition from elementary to junior high without the ability to read proficiently. Legislative responses to the growing population of undocumented immigrant children, however, often creates tensions between policymakers, educators, and the public, leading to unfocused policies and ineffective interventions. Kansas, for example, recently eliminated food stamps for hundreds of low-income U.S. children whose parents are undocumented immigrants. Additionally, the number of Hispanic children attending Alabama's public schools dropped noticeably once officials were required to check the immigration status of newly enrolled students and their parents. So you kind of get a sense of the first paragraph of what this proposal might be about, but if you're being that ruthless editor, you're releasing that, that ruthless editor yourself, you're beginning to see, wait, this needs a lot of work. This has a lot of potential, but it needs a lot of work. Since we have Chris and Mike here, I think we're kind of at a nice stopping point if they would like to go ahead and talk for a little bit, and I don't have to talk anymore for a while, give everybody a break, and then you guys can just share your thoughts. And they're going to share for about 15 minutes each, and then do some questions and answers too.